Which of these questions is the correct way to ask for the use of a word? So like, how do you use this? How to use this word? How do I use? How are you using it? How is it used? It is Friday. Wonderful. It's been a hard week, guys. Loving it. So, which of these is correct, basically? Think about your standard word order. So we've got our question word, how. That's the same. Then we need a verb, probably. So is it how to use this word? How do I use? How are you using it? How is it used? If we're asking about the usage or how to use a word, what is the correct way to do this? Let's see if we can get the basics down. Oh, big money. Alright, going once, going twice. Boom! Oh my goodness, guys. So, only one of these is actually correct. Sorry. And it is in fact, how is it used? So, why? So in this case, it is the word, right? So we could say, how is this word used? Same as before. Sorry, someone's jumping in. So then we have the standard word order, right? If we say how to use this word, we don't use the infinitive in this. We could say like, how do you use this word? Fine. But we wouldn't say how to use. So we don't use the infinitive. In this case, it's a very, very common mistake, actually. How do I use? The problem with B is the use what? We need an object, right? So how do I use it? How do I use this word? We're missing the object. And how are you using it? We'd have to say, when we have ing, we'd have to say, how are you using it? Tricky, 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 guys. You see? Questions are not easy. All right, look at that. Points going round. And if you've just joined us, welcome, Erzsébet. The link is in the chat. So, choose the correct way to ask for feedback on your speaking skills. So if you're asking me like, hey, how's my English? How would you rank me? Am I a B1? Am I B2? What's the best way to ask this? So, oh man, the wrong answers are very hard for me to read. My brain is automatically correcting it. Can give me feedback on my speaking? It's so hard to say it. I'll give you a clue. It's not that one. How do you think about my speaking? Can you give me feedback on my speaking? Could you feedback me about my speaking? Which of these is the correct question? And thank you to those of you who bought me a beer 2 weeks ago. It means a lot to me. I love it. You can buy me a beer again and keep the Friday night English going forever. It runs on beers, guys. So, which of these is correct? Can give me feedback on my speaking? How do you think about my speaking? Can you give me feedback on my speaking? Could you give me feedback about my speaking? Or... oh, it's still a bit split. I'm glad you guys listened, because it's definitely not A. Oh, it is in fact C. 10 of you got it right. Beautiful. So, very quickly, how do you think about my speaking? We wouldn't say how do you think, we'd say how do you feel, right? So, because you're asking me about my opinion, so how do you feel about my speaking would make sense, but I can't say how do you think, we'd say what do you think about it? So, question words, it's different. And D is not correct, because we'd say could you give me feedback? And so, we can't use feedback as a verb. So, like you give feedback, it's something you do. And then, so feedback is actually the object. There you go. And now you know. Now, you want to ask about the best way to study vocabulary. Vocabulary meaning words, phrases, things like that. So, which question is correct? You're asking about the best way to learn vocabulary. Would it be A? What's the best way to learn vocabulary? B. How to learn the vocabulary best? C. What is the best to learn vocabulary? Or D, what is best way for learn vocabulary? How are we doing so far, guys? Has anyone got them all right so far? I believe in you. This is the tricky part. It's just the standard word order. And I would say, if you're getting some of them wrong, don't feel bad. These are actually very, very common mistakes that I get a lot. So, no hard feelings. Everybody's in. Let's have a look. Oh my goodness. It's Goo versus 17. Could he be? I'm afraid not. I'm sorry, Goo. So in this case, yeah, what's the best way to learn? So in this case, the what would be what is. And I'm sorry, Goo, but what is, we're missing the. So when we have best, we need the best. What is the best way? And then we'd say to learn, as in, and so on, because it's like, otherwise we'd have to say for learning vocabulary. Tricky, tricky, tricky. There you go. So, almost there, guys. You want to ask about using would. You just want to know, how do I use this word? So, which question is correct? When do I use would? How do I use would? Where do I use would? Which do I use? Would or could? So, which of these would be correct? You want to know about the word would. So, would it be, when do I use would? How do I use would? Where do I use would? Or which do I use? Would or could? Not so fast now, I see. Tricky, tricky questions. I love it. Alright, take your time, guys. There's no rush. We've got an hour or so just to relax, learn English, ask questions. It's going to be great. So, which of these would you ask, do you reckon? Alright. I am gonna speed you up now, sorry. So, going once, going twice, no pressure, hit a button. Panic, 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 panic. Oh my goodness. Look at that. It's quite a spread. Well, I have wonderful news for you guys. They're all correct. Yay! So, this is kind of the problem. So when we talk about asking the right question, as an English teacher, I get a lot of this. And there are loads of problems with these questions. So grammatically, every one of these is correct. You all get a point. Good for you. So, the problem we have though is that there's no context here, right? So, for example, if you ask me like, when do I use would, that's actually quite a big question. There are many, many situations that where or when you would use would. So actually we can use when and where interchangeably here. So where do I use would, like where in the sentence maybe? When do I use it? What's the situation? How do I use it? What's the rule? But these are not simple questions because it really depends. It depends on a lot of things, like who are you talking to? What's going on? Which do I use, would or could? Again, it really depends on the situation. So when we look at like asking questions and improving your English and what kind of questions to ask, you have to be very careful with this because the rules won't always fit. It depends a lot with English. So, for example, I could tell you very quickly, would is about what you want, could is about what's possible, sure. But then there's lots of situations where we use would and it's not about what you want, it's about the future, and it's a possible future. Then there's other situations where we use it in a passive, or we're using it in reported speech, where it's actually about, I'm not 100% sure about this. There's loads of different things that could apply to would, right? So, when we look at English, and this is not just would or could, this is the entire language. It works in the same way, right? So, when we look at English, there are many things which are not black and white. It's like, well, it depends. This is the rule most of the time, but sometimes this, right? Even spelling, we have different spellings, you know, American English, British English. It's confusing. It's not easy as a student to learn this stuff. So my advice really, if we're looking at asking the right question, of course you want to try and, some things, as we saw with the grammar, some things are like, no, that's wrong, that is correct. But when we're looking at the kind of questions to ask, or if you're thinking like, how do I improve my English, or how can I get advice, think about the context, right? And the context very simply is what is happening in that situation. So this is why I was asking you, why do you want to improve your English? Many of you said you want to improve it for your work or for your career. Awesome. So when you're thinking about these questions, rather than thinking like, how do I use would, it's like, how do I use would at work, right? Which actually then focuses it. If that's why you want to learn English and that's where you will use it, then if you give me the context, or any teacher, or just anyone really, then it really helps kind of being like, oh, well, you know, you would use it, for example, if you're requesting something like, would you give me this? Like, is it possible? Things like that, right? So context really helps. It helps you as well. So we're going to look at this now, ways you can use context to ask better questions, and you'll get better answers, simply. So, which of the following is the best way to ask about using I have been?